When 12-year-old Jamal Thompson whispered, "The cops beat me," the courtroom fell silent. But what happened next would shock the nation and change everything. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. All eyes were fixed on the small figure standing at the witness stand. At just 12 years old, Jamal Thompson looked even younger than his age, his wide eyes scanning the room nervously. His hands gripped the edges of the wooden podium, his knuckles white. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening as she addressed him. "Jamal," she began, her voice calm but firm, "can you tell us what happened on the night of October 12th? Jamal hesitated, his lower lip trembling. He glanced over at his mother, who sat in the front row, her face streaked with tears but her expression resolute. She nodded at him, silently urging him to be brave. Taking a deep breath, Jamal turned back to the judge and spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The cops beat me," he said. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and the jury exchanged shocked glances. Even the defense attorney, a seasoned lawyer known for his stoic demeanor, seemed momentarily taken aback. The judge raised her gavel, silencing the room with a sharp rap. "Order!" she commanded. "Jamal, please continue." Jamal's voice grew steadier as he recounted the events of that fateful night. He explained how he had been walking home from a friend's house, a route he had taken countless times before. It was just after 8 p.m., and the streets were quiet. As he turned the corner onto his block, he noticed a police cruiser parked near the sidewalk. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "They told me to stop," Jamal said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know why. I wasn't doing anything wrong." According to Jamal, the officers approached him, their voices harsh and accusatory. They claimed he matched the description of a suspect involved in a nearby robbery, a suspect described as a teenage male wearing a hoodie. Jamal, wearing a similar hoodie, tried to explain that he was just heading home, but the officers didn't listen. "One of them grabbed me," Jamal continued, his voice breaking. "He pushed me against the car and started hitting me. I kept telling them I didn't do anything, but they didn't stop." The courtroom was dead silent as Jamal described the blows, the punches to his ribs, the slap across his face, the knee to his back as he fell to the ground. His mother sobbed quietly in the front row, clutching a tissue to her face. The jury listened intently, their expressions a mix of horror and disbelief. When Jamal finished his testimony, the defense attorney stood up, his polished shoes clicking against the courtroom floor. He approached the witness stand with a confident stride, his expression carefully neutral. "Jamal," he began, his tone measured, "you said the officers hit you, but isn't it true that you resisted arrest? That you were uncooperative and refused to comply with their orders?" Jamal shook his head vehemently. "No, sir. I did everything they told me to do. I didn't fight back. I just kept telling them I didn't do anything wrong." The attorney pressed further, questioning Jamal's recollection of the events and suggesting that his memory might be flawed. But Jamal held his ground, his voice growing stronger with each response. By the time the attorney sat down, it was clear that Jamal's testimony had left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The courtroom had already been through a roller coaster of emotions by the time the prosecution called their final witness. Jamal's testimony had left the room in stunned silence, his words painting a vivid and harrowing picture of the night he was allegedly beaten by police. The defense had tried to chip away at his credibility, but Jamal's unwavering composure and raw honesty had made a profound impact on everyone present. Now, as Officer Daniel Harris took the stand, the tension in the room was palpable. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment when the truth would either be confirmed or unraveled. Officer Harris, one of the 2 officers involved in the incident, walked to the stand with an air of confidence. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, and his expression carefully neutral. He was the picture of professionalism, a stark contrast to the frightened 12-year-old boy who had testified just moments before. As he swore to tell the truth, the room seemed to hold its breath. The prosecution began their questioning, and Harris recounted his version of events with practiced ease. According to Harris, Jamal had been acting suspiciously on the night of the incident. He claimed that Jamal had refused to comply with their orders, becoming aggressive and forcing the officers to use necessary force to subdue him. His tone was calm, his words measured, and for a moment, it seemed as though his testimony might cast doubt on Jamal's account. But then, the prosecutor took a different approach. "Officer Harris," the prosecutor said, holding up a small device for the court to see, "do you recognize this?" Harris's eyes narrowed as he stared at the object. It was a body camera, the kind worn by police officers to record their interactions with the public. The room seemed to tense as the significance of the device became clear. "Yes," Harris replied cautiously. "That's a body camera." The prosecutor nodded. "And is it true that you were wearing this body camera on the night in question?" Harris hesitated, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Yes, but—" "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, turning to the judge. "We would like to play the footage from Officer Harris's body camera." The request sent a ripple through the courtroom. The judge, after a brief moment of consideration, granted the motion. A screen was set up, and the footage began to play. What followed was a moment of reckoning, a moment that would leave the courtroom in stunned silence and change the course of the trial entirely. The video opened with a shaky view of the street, the camera mounted on Harris's chest. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the night of October 12th, just after 8 p.m. The footage showed Jamal walking down the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, looking like any other kid heading home. The officers approached him, their voices audible on the recording. "Hey, stop right there!" one of the officers barked. Jamal froze, his hands immediately going up in a gesture of surrender. "I'm just going home," he said, his voice trembling. The officers didn't listen. They ordered him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Jamal complied without hesitation, his movements slow and deliberate. There was no resistance, no aggression, just a scared 12-year-old boy trying to do exactly as he was told. And then, the unthinkable. One of the officers grabbed Jamal by the arm, yanking him roughly toward the police car. Jamal cried out in pain, his voice high-pitched and desperate. "I didn't do anything. Please, I'm just going home." The officers didn't stop. What followed was a brutal and unprovoked assault. The footage showed one officer slamming Jamal against the car, his small body crumpling under the force. The other officer began striking him, punches to the ribs, a slap across the face, a knee to the back as Jamal fell to the ground. Jamal's cries were heart-wrenching, his pleas for mercy ignored. The courtroom was in shock. Jamal's mother, who had been holding herself together throughout the trial, broke down in tears, her sobs echoing through the room. The jurors, many of whom had been stoic up until this point, looked visibly shaken. Even the judge, a woman known for her composure, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. When the footage ended, the room was eerily quiet. The prosecutor turned to Officer Harris, his voice cold and deliberate. "Officer Harris," he said, "do you still stand by your testimony?" Harris stared straight ahead, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The footage had exposed the truth in a way that words never could. The judge didn't wait for his response. "Officer Harris," she said, her voice firm, "you are hereby charged with perjury and assault. Bailiff, take him into custody." The bailiff stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting in the fluorescent light. Harris stood slowly, his movements stiff and mechanical, as if he were in a daze. The sound of the cuffs clicking into place was jarring, a stark reminder that no one, not even those in positions of power, is above the law. As Harris was led out of the courtroom, the weight of what had just transpired settled over the room. Jamal sat quietly, his small frame dwarfed by the witness stand. But in that moment he seemed taller, stronger, a symbol of courage and resilience. The real shock wasn't just the footage itself. It was the realization that a 12-year-old boy had stood up to a system that often felt impenetrable, and his truth had shattered its facade. The courtroom, usually a place of rigid formality, erupted in applause. It was a rare but heartfelt tribute to a young boy who had stood up against injustice and won. The real shock wasn't just the revelation of the truth, it was the reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and honesty can prevail. The courtroom, once a place of rigid formality and calculated arguments, now felt like the epicenter of a seismic shift. The air was thick with tension, disbelief, and a palpable sense of justice teetering on the edge. As the body camera footage concluded, the silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any outburst could, a collective gasp from everyone present, as if the weight of what they had just witnessed had momentarily stolen their ability to react. Jamal, still seated on the witness stand, looked small and fragile, yet his presence loomed large. He had done the unthinkable. A 12-year-old boy had stood up to a system that often felt impenetrable, and his truth had shattered its facade. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney known for his unflinching demeanor, took a moment to compose himself before addressing Officer Harris once more. His voice, usually steady and commanding, carried a hint of barely restrained anger. "Officer Harris," he began, his tone sharp and deliberate, "do you still stand by your testimony?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine, and all eyes turned to Harris. The officer, who had entered the courtroom with an air of confidence, now looked visibly shaken. His uniform, once a symbol of authority, seemed to weigh heavily on him as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His silence was as damning as any confession. The judge, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach, didn't wait for Harris to find his voice. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she addressed him directly. "Officer Harris," she said, her voice firm and unwavering, "you are hereby charged with perjury and assault. Bailiff, take him into custody." The words echoed through the room, each syllable carrying the weight of justice served. The bailiff, a tall, broad-shouldered man, stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting in the fluorescent light. Harris stood slowly, his movements stiff and mechanical, as if he were in a daze. The sound of the cuffs clicking into place was jarring, a stark reminder that no one, not even those in positions of power, is above the law. As Harris was led out of the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted once again. The initial shock gave way to a wave of emotions: relief, anger, sorrow, and even hope. Jamal's mother, who had been a pillar of strength throughout the trial, finally broke down. She rushed to her son, pulling him into a tight embrace as tears streamed down her face. "You did it, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You told the truth and they heard you." Jamal, though visibly exhausted, managed a small smile. In that moment, he wasn't just a 12-year-old boy. He was a symbol of courage, a beacon of hope for countless others who had faced similar injustices. The courtroom, usually a place of stoic professionalism, erupted in applause. It was a rare and spontaneous display of emotion, a collective acknowledgement of the bravery it had taken for Jamal to stand up and speak his truth. The jurors, many of whom had been moved to tears during the trial, exchanged nods of approval. Even the judge, typically reserved and impartial, allowed herself a small, approving smile. "Jamal," she said, addressing him directly, "thank you for your bravery today. You've shown us the truth, and justice will be served." Her words were a balm, a reassurance that his suffering had not been in vain, but the impact of Jamal's testimony extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Within hours, the story began to spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the case, and Jamal's face was everywhere, on television screens, social media feeds, and the front pages of newspapers. His words, "The cops beat me," became a rallying cry, a stark reminder of the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement and the urgent need for reform. Protests erupted in cities across the country, with demonstrators holding signs that read "Justice for Jamal" and "End Police Brutality." The footage from Harris's body camera, now public, was shared millions of times, each view amplifying the call for accountability. Politicians and activists alike seized on the moment, using Jamal's story to push for legislative change. Bills were introduced to mandate the use of body cameras for all law enforcement officers, with strict penalties for those who failed to comply. Community leaders organized town halls and forums, inviting law enforcement and civilians to engage in open dialogue about rebuilding trust. Jamal's case became a catalyst for a broader conversation about race, power, and justice in America, a conversation that had been a long time coming. For Jamal and his family, life would never be the same. The trial had taken a toll on them, both emotionally and financially. Jamal's mother, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, had taken unpaid leave to be by her son's side throughout the ordeal. The media attention, while bringing much-needed awareness, also brought its own set of challenges. Reporters camped outside their home, and strangers approached them in public, offering words of support, or, in some cases, unwelcome opinions. But through it all, Jamal remained resilient. He returned to school, where his classmates and teachers rallied around him, offering their support and admiration. In the months that followed, Jamal's story continued to inspire. He was invited to speak at rallies and events where he shared his experience and called for change. His voice, once trembling and unsure, grew stronger with each appearance. He became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest voices can make a difference. And though the scars of that night would never fully fade, Jamal found solace in knowing that his truth had sparked a movement that would hopefully prevent others from enduring what he had. The aftermath of Jamal's case was a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. It was a reminder that justice, though often delayed, is worth fighting for. And for Jamal, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by the pain he had endured, but by the courage he had shown in the face of adversity. His story was far from over, but one thing was certain: Jamal Thompson had changed the world, one truth at a time. In the days that followed, Jamal's story made national headlines, sparking a renewed debate about police accountability and the use of body cameras. Protests erupted in cities across the country, with demonstrators demanding justice for Jamal and others like him. Lawmakers introduced new legislation aimed at increasing transparency and oversight within law enforcement. As for Jamal, he returned to his normal life, but with a newfound sense of purpose. He had faced the system head-on and emerged victorious, proving that even the smallest voices can make a difference. And though the scars of that night would never fully fade, Jamal knew one thing for certain: he had spoken his truth, and the world had listened.